Hello, and welcome to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro, a podcast all about the Bible, theology, and all things related to the Christian faith. I'm the Ryan half of Ryan and Brian, and this is episode number 16. This week, we're introducing something we call Pastor Chat, which is just that, a chat with the pastor serving in the church. And in this episode, we talk with Greg Taylor, the lead minister of Second Church of Christ in Danville, Illinois. We talk with him about what's going on in his church and how they are responding to this cultural moment. As we've mentioned several times in the podcast, we want to support the local church and pastors and think conversations like this can help all of us get a peek behind the curtain of church life and make advances for the kingdom. This conversation isn't just for pastors. It's for all of us who are a part of the church community. Before we get started, if you're enjoying the podcast, would you mind leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or a review on Facebook? If that's not your thing, would you mind sharing the post about this episode or another episode you've enjoyed on Facebook, or just tell a friend? We'd love to expand our audience. All right, with all that said, let's jump into this pastor chat with Greg Taylor of Second Church of Christ. All right, well, welcome back to the Bistro.
Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
It's going all right. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be here back in Bistro. And the Bistro is on the road today.
It is. We're in, the Bible Bistro is kind of a state of mind.
Like a New York state of mind?
It's something like that.
But we're in Danville, Illinois. It's a Danville state of mind.
And we have a special guest with us today.
Yes, we do. Who is it?
Greg Taylor is with us today. How are you doing, Greg?
Man, it is a blessing to be here, and I can't think of a better place for the bistro to land than Danville, Illinois.
Yeah.
Hey, that's right.
We've had some good coffee and some good food.
Yes.
Yeah, a good sandwich. So it is a neat little place. So
yeah, absolutely.
Greg is the pastor at Second Church of Christ in Danville, Illinois. And tell us a little, you've been here a couple of years now, is that right?
Yes, late summer 2019, we made the move from the Geo Center of Illinois, Chestnut, Illinois, to Danville, and just man, what a great church to serve. Love Second Church.
Cool. And so you're the preaching pastor here, senior pastor.
The title they gave me is lead minister.
Okay.
And so we actually have a leadership team where we have an executive minister, a lead minister, and a next gen minister, and kind of the three of us are the leadership team.
Okay. Greg and I go way back. He knows Ryan as well. We've used to work together at a Christian college, Lincoln Christian College, and we were just talking earlier. We ate together on a daily basis. It's kind of cool. We'd have lunch together, and Greg's a good friend. He left that, went to another ministry, and we stayed in touch. And I'll say Greg's been there with me through some important times, and was I just appreciate you stuck with me in the midst of difficult times too. So Greg's a good guy, and so we want to ask him some things today about ministry and what it's like. Tell us a bit about what do you like about the ministry here? What kind of things do you do, or what's important to you here in this place?
Well, what I love about Second Church is they have tried to leverage who they are and where they are for, the most kingdom impact possible. I can remember first hearing about Second Church in Danville and just thinking, I don't think I'm moving to Danville, Illinois. I mean, it's not a community that has a great reputation. Now, I will tell you, I love Danville.
Right.
And there's so much positive. Now, there is some negative. I think every community would have some negative, but I think Second Church has said, this is our Jerusalem. How can we leverage what we have here? One example is Celebrate Recovery. Okay. That's a ministry that has been happening here for almost 4 years, and I think it's revolutionized the church, and I would say the community in a lot of ways.
So what is Celebrate Recovery
Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered 12-step recovery program. Rick Warren, Saddleback Church, started this 32 years ago. There's 35,000 Celebrate Recoveries worldwide.
Okay.
But prior to COVID, I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise to see 200 people here on a Tuesday night.
Wow. Okay.
And it's helping people. A lot of people think recovery, well, that's booze or drugs. Really, they're saying it's helping people overcome hurts and hang-ups and habits, and life transforming in many ways.
Okay. So there's lots of groups around for people if they're interested in looking that up.
We have like a life issues group. So there's a women's survivors group. There's chemical dependency. There's a men's moral integrity group.
Wow.
And that's a group that's growing.
Sure.
We have a huge impact here with the VA just down the road. So there's a group for veterans. And
that's cool.
I think it's just trying to help people where they're at, realize your life as it is not where it has to stay.
Right.
And there's hope. And ultimately, we believe that hope is in Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's a good group.
We've talked about a couple of times when we've talked about the church in decline and different things, the importance of connection, Ryan.
Absolutely. That was one of the things in one of our previous episodes. We did a discussion with Ryan Burge, and he was talking about that one of the quotes that he said I thought was really profound. He's like, people usually come to church for the wrong reasons,
right?
But they stay for the right ones.
Right.
And so, that importance of connection, especially with people that are dealing with these issues. I mean, we're all dealing with issues.
Right.
I mean, we're all sinners. We've all got these issues, but just that importance of connection with all that.
That's great.
And I think Second Church, one of the mottos around here is that we're a grace place. That looks great on a placard.
Right.
But to live it out, I mean, at times that's messy.
It's very messy.
At times that's challenging.
Yeah.
And at times it allows others maybe to point fingers at you and say things that aren't very nice. But I think the leadership here, we're okay with that.
Good.
And we realize that there's times people will say, we're not going to be here forever, but we're going to be with you for a couple weeks or for a couple months, and we need to heal. And I think the leadership here, whenever it happened, maybe it was back to when our friend Randy Kirk was senior pastor here in the 1990s, but I think they realized we got a great opportunity. Too many people run away from their community. They're embarrassed. I know before they actually interviewed me for this position, they'd talked to a couple people that, a headhunter had recommended. And they said, well, we're really intrigued with your church, but we don't want to live in Danville. We'll live in Champaign or we'll live in Lafayette. That's not what this leadership's about. We are here and we want to make the most of the opportunities that we have.
So, Greg, besides, you've got a great community here. You've got a great ministry going on here. So what else are you doing besides this? I mean, it's kind of why we came here. So tell us a little about what else you're doing.
So for years, when I was in Clinton, Illinois, I would drive to Decatur every Wednesday night for Direct Line Radio with my friend Wayne Kent from First Christian Church Decatur. And I always said, if I ever left Clinton and landed in a larger community, I was going to try to steal his idea. It's totally his idea. And so literally 2 weeks before COVID hit, we started Direct Line Danville Radio. And we were live in the studio for 3 weeks. And then we've been pre-recording ever since. And you guys came over today, and we were able to, record an episode of Direct Line for the May 27 show. But Direct Line looks at the events of the world and especially the events of the community through the lens of faith.
Wow.
And it's bigger than Second Church. It's bigger than any church per se, but it's really trying to help people. A lot of people that listen to AM radio are not believers. Or maybe they went to church when they were a kid and they didn't leave well. They don't have this great image. And we want to help people maybe see church, maybe see faith in a different light, possibly.
That's cool. Yeah, and it was a first for us. We were on a radio show. It was kind of interesting to be on the other side of the mic in a way.
It was interesting. I don't know what to do. It's live. Like, I can't edit this.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, though. Give me some feedback. What'd you think of Direct Line Danville?
It was great.
It was very good. People should check it out.
Check it out.
How do they, if they want to listen to it, we'll plug you here real quick.
VermilionCountyFirst.com is the home of Newhoff Media. And under podcast, you can find Direct Line. And I think we're up to show 64, I want to say, something along those lines. Yeah.
Okay.
We're big time, buddy.
Well, we'll provide...
We just hit
not really
double digits not that long ago.
That's an LOL, not really.
We'll provide our link to that in our show notes too, if people want to check that out. But,
absolutely,
it was a lot of fun. No, you made us feel at home and did a great job. You and your co-host Stephanie.
I got to talk about Stephanie. She does a great job. She gives obviously a different perspective. And she's our worship minister here in Main Auditorium at Second Church, and love her perspective. Thankful for our tech guys that make it happen, but it's one of those kind of outside the box ministries that early on, I think, has given us an opportunity to have a voice in places that we didn't have previously.
That's important for us as believers, I think. So you mentioned COVID and how it's changed the way you've done the radio. And so then one of the things we really wanted to talk to you about was this idea. I think it's been a tough year for all of us, tough year and a half or 2 years now almost.
Right.
And for pastors it's been difficult because we've had to do things differently. Our jobs have changed and this kind of thing. Our ministries have changed. And so one of the things we wanted to bring you on is to talk about this. So How would you say that the people here and the people you've ministered to have really responded to this crisis?
Yeah.
What do you think about what it's been like for you over the past couple of years? Give us some insight in that.
Well, I think, and again, I'm speaking in generalities because in a lot of ways, we don't really know 100% how it's going to play out.
Sure.
But since COVID hit, I think from a financial standpoint, we've been incredibly blessed.
Right.
We haven't missed a beat, which I would not have predicted that whatsoever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know we've lost people. We lost people because maybe we didn't go far enough in terms of restrictions. I know we lost people because they said, I'm not wearing a mask and I'm not coming to church. So on both sides, I think you've lost people. But at the end of the day, as we open up more and more, we're seeing more and more people come back.
Okay.
But I would describe my state as kind of a roller coaster. There were times during COVID, I would tell you it was the best of times for me. I was stronger spiritually than I'd been. I was practicing spiritual disciplines on the daily basis, walking. My wife and I spent a ton of time together last summer. But then there's times you get that email or you get that message and it just, it cuts your soul out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you know, for me, I think the thing that I've said more than anything over the past year and a half is be kind to one another. And it's like, it doesn't matter, no matter how much I say that people struggle with that.
I think a lot of people are, but I think for some, the bullies, I would say, have really had a platform at times, unfortunately. And I think it has impacted churches. And to me, when someone says, Second Church isn't for me, or First Christian Church, Clinton isn't for me, and I found a place that I'm going to be able to grow in my walk with Jesus, I want to encourage them in that.
Absolutely.
My fear is many people walk and they're not connected anywhere, you know, and I think that's, time will tell how much of that has played out.
That's well said. The testing kind of shows who we are, and what's important to us and those kind of things. And I think we've seen some of that. So,
and it wasn't just COVID.
Yeah,
Brian.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
You got racism that I think came to the forefront, with George Floyd and all of that happened. And then this election. I mean, I say every year it's the most contentious election in my lifetime, but I think in 2020, that's probably true.
It was. And all of it. And I'm glad you said that, because really that's, when we talk about being a pastor, and I'm going to tell you I'm just going to lay my cards on the table and tell you where my concern is. I've said early on in this that, I was talking to other ministers, talking to other pastors, and hearing the distress and hearing them say, this is a different situation I've ever faced. And like you're saying, getting the ugly emails, the ugly phone calls, people on both sides basically saying you're not doing this right. And I said to you and some other friends and some other people, I think we're going to see pastors walk away. And we've seen people not going to a different congregation, but leaving ministry in general. And so that's why I thought it was important to talk to you, Greg, and to kind of say, what is it about all this? How do you think it is that, pastors are responding in this period of time?
Well, I think in 2020, most pastors realized I didn't have that class in seminary, how to handle a pandemic.
Right.
So I think for a lot of them, I mean, it was, I got to do whatever I got to do. And, it's do whatever it takes. And they really hunkered down. They probably worked harder and longer than maybe they ever had in their lifetime. And I think what you're seeing as you get into 2021, and I think there's fatigue, there's burnout, and I think it's not changing maybe like they thought it was going to. And I think you're going to see that, Brian. William Vanderbloemen, I don't know if you know that name or not, but he was on a Carey Nieuwhof podcast that my friend Randy Kirk sent us late last fall. And he said 2021, you're going to see more people exit vocational ministry in a calendar year than any year in a long time, maybe ever.
Interesting.
And I'll be honest, I'm seeing that.
Yeah. Well, I saw a radio show talking about the people changing, took the opportunity to change occupations a lot. Something like 20% of people changed occupations. And I think that we're seeing this. Ryan, you had some things.
Yeah, there's an article on the Christian Century, and it was talking, and this was just released May 17th, 2021. And apparently Barna Group had done a survey with pastors, and in the last year, over 29% of them had considered not just leaving their church, leaving ministry full time. It wasn't, I'm looking for another church. It's just like, I'm done with this. And I think that's a scary prospect.
Well, wrap your brain around that. That's 3 out of every 10 So think of 10 pastors that 10 pastors that we ate lunch with at, the bad Chinese buffet, wherever it was, 3 of them are saying this year,
pastors love nothing better than a Chinese buffet.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, you want to get a group of pastors. Do they even do buffets anymore? Is that even happening?
I haven't seen it very much. So anyway, but you're saying 3 and 10 of, like if you think of 10,
wrap your brain around that.
10 churches.
29%. And again, a lot of churches have multi-staff situations. I know one of the trends that I don't think anybody expected is it seems like the bigger the church, the harder the hit. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the mega churches, they've had to make some pretty significant cuts, and
financially.
And 2 years ago, we'd look at some, and I won't name any of them, but you'd look at them and you'd say that's the healthiest church in America, or that's the healthiest church in our brotherhood, and they may be very healthy, but they've had to make some pretty massive cuts. I'll be honest, in March of 2020. I'm thinking to myself, how are we going to handle a 30% or because they were saying 30 to 40% reduction in giving? That didn't happen here. And frankly, that didn't happen most places in the circles that I run. Now, I'm not running with the big dogs. I'm not running with the churches of 10,000.
I think you're right. Several congregations, people have stepped up and what a great example that is. That we're going to continue to give. We've seen people who didn't miss a beat with their tithes and their offerings, and fantastic. I mean, that's a great thing.
I think the other thing that I've realized, and I've known this intellectually, but I think I've really seen it play out. Last week, we finally jumped over the 900 mark. Now, we were running about 1,300 before COVID. Okay. So I'm not a math major, although I'm married to a math teacher, but I think that's around 70%.
Right.
Giving has been, we've been in the black. So what's that say, though, about how many people maybe really weren't giving or weren't plugged in necessarily? So I think you've seen that play out a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that, how this is all playing out, because I think there's, as we talked about, some of the other issues, not besides just a virus, but the issues of racism, politics. Like, talk to us a little bit about ministering through that, because it's not just one thing at a time. And it seems like each one of them has its own division line between them. You know, the virus has its own division line. Politics has its own division line. Racism has its own division line.
Absolutely.
How does the church navigate that? How have you guys navigated that?
Well, I don't know that we've done it correctly necessarily, but I think the overarching principle has been Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the answer. Jesus is our hope. So we've had more discussions on race. We've actually hosted and been a part of some multi-church, multi-pastor efforts that have taken place, but we've tried to always say at the end of the day, Jesus is the answer. When it comes to politics, I mean, that is a dividing line.
Oh, my goodness.
And you've got to be really careful. And direct line radio, I know there's times that even if you discuss an issue that shouldn't be political party driven, but the issue of abortion, I think sometimes people hear that as, you're bashing one party or you're bashing one candidate, and just keep trying to go back to Jesus, keep trying to go back to the hope that we have. It's hard, but I think that's the answer.
I've been surprised on how people hear you. Like you'll say something sometimes, and they'll take offense at it, and because they're thinking you're making a political statement, and it's like, I wasn't even talking about that at all. But it's almost like we're all on edge. Ryan, you'd mentioned that we're at home. We're kind of isolated. We're depending on social media, and I'll say other forms of media. Television. People have television channels on all day, and kind of becomes a silo,
Yeah, and I think that, we talk about fatigue and like everybody feeling fatigue. I've worked in a church. That's been part of my life. And it's like, even when things are going well, there's always someone that's upset. But like, I think in this current climate, you're trying to take this path and someone's always going to be upset. And it's like, and it's typically not a small group on both sides. Like you're trying to play referee, but like, no, I'm putting it to Jesus, but it's like, both sides are almost warring with each other in that.
We hosted, we actually produced a video with 3 really faithful African-American members of our congregation. And we had a Sunday, we were going through a book, What Made Jesus Mad by Tim Harlow. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not. And one of the things that made Jesus mad was prejudice and racism. And so we announced, hey, we're going to have this video, and RJ and Brenda and Pat are going to be a part of it. I had one person really upset. What are they going to say? I said, well, you'll have to come next week. They were anticipating that we were traveling down a certain road. that was going to go against their political bent, and they were fired up before they'd even seen the video.
Right.
And it goes to your point of just being on edge, you know. And I also have to say this, I think sometimes depending on what show you're watching at night, you know, if it's a Fox News or an MSNBC or CNN, I think sometimes they're trying to get viewers. And I think a lot of times the spicier, the more intense, the more angry, the more viewers. And I think I have to be very careful.
Yeah.
You know, politics is something I love to talk. Politics is something that I'm interested in, and I have to keep myself under control. And I frankly tried to, just on a personal level, stop watching as much of that. I listen to a podcast every morning by World Magazine, The World and Everything in It. And it basically is saying we're going to give you the news from a biblical worldview. And it's really changed my countenance a lot of times because I know they're not driven by this party or that party or this candidate or that candidate. So I guess I'm plugging another podcast. I don't know if I'm able to do that
that's
or not.
great.
We'll scratch this from the record. There is only one podcast.
I love it. And it's helped change me in a lot of ways. You know?
Well, exactly what you said is I keep encouraging people, don't spend all day on this one channel. And I actually said it just a couple of weeks ago in a sermon. I said, what are we being formed by? Because we believe, and one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is we believe that we need to be formed biblically, that the scripture should, it's not just a matter of knowing the scriptures and understanding them, but we believe it changes us and it forms us. But if we're spending, I'm going to be optimistic, 15 minutes a day in scripture. And then we're spending, 10 hours in front of I don't care which channel. It could be the History Channel for that matter. What are we being formed by? What is changing our way we look at the world?
Yeah. So I read quite a bit, and so I've been reading all these books, and I had a buddy of mine one time goes like, "How do you find time to read these books?" And I said, and he watched Sports Center all the time, and I'm like, because I'm not watching Sports Center. Like I just said, like, this is important. I remember coming to a place in my life, even in my Bible reading, like informing my mind, like kind of going, I can't continue to say that Christianity and my faith is important if I am unwilling to make any time for it in my life. Like at some point I have to quit just lying to myself. Either I have to admit it's not important to me, or I have to change my priorities. And so I think it's, getting back to this, are we letting the world form our minds, which we know the world is not really great at forming our minds. Like it's leading us down this division and this path. And, are we rooting ourselves in scripture, in God's word? It's kind of going back to like, how would Jesus respond to this? It's coming back to that. And we can't understand that unless we're in the revelation from God about who he is.
The first Bible verse I memorized was John 3:16. I think that's everybody's first. But I think the second was Psalm 119:11. I've hidden your word in my heart. Why? That I might not sin against you. And I'm not always good at that. I'm a guy, Ryan, I can waste a lot of time watching sports. I can waste a lot of time watching politics. I can waste a lot of time binge watching something on Netflix. There's times I'm thinking, why am I even invested in this series? And you're right. It's that idea of what really matters most. And, I'm pouring through the Minor Prophets right now because I'm getting ready to do a class this summer with a professor on the Minor Prophets. Man, I haven't read through the Minor Prophets in years. Shame on me. As a pastor, as a preacher, as a minister. I need to do that more.
Yeah, man, I did this is kind of off the topic. I did a series on the Minor Prophets, and I did this kind of before this whole cultural moment we're talking about now.
Good.
It is, and the thing is, these were guys that God called. These were people that God called to speak to their culture about very difficult things, and I think it really kind of tells us about the responsibility we have to say difficult things sometimes.
Absolutely.
Unpopular things sometimes. These guys. My series I always titled "Taking a Prophet to Dinner" because
there you go. Yeah.
It's kind of that image that these guys would not be good dinner guests. These are not the kind of polite. They're not going to engage in polite dinner conversation. They're going to say things that the people like. You cows of Bashan. That kind of stuff, and they're going to say things that are going to be offensive, and sometimes people need to hear.
And I think that's one negative trend that I see in a lot of churches is preachers and teachers avoiding difficult subjects because they know it's not going to play well in the pews or the chairs or whatever the auditorium looks like. A big issue for me, I'm adopted, so life has always been, the life issue has always been really important to me. So every Sanctity of Human Life Sunday, I do something along those lines. And I can remember a really good preacher friend saying, I will never tackle that on Sunday morning, because I know I got a lot of pro-choice people in the pews that aren't going to like it.
Yeah.
And he has that right to do
Sure.
that. But when I think about Amos, when I think about Habakkuk, when I think about some of these minor prophets, they're throwing down.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
That's my point. And that's why it's, I kind of that reared image. These are not people you would enjoy just hanging out with.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I think, to make this positive, we talked about what's gone wrong, but that the Word of God can transcend these issues, that the Word of God brings us back
Absolutely.
to the true north, through all this stuff. So, Greg, what do you say to church members? Because we have two different audiences that kind of listen to this podcast. We have some church leaders that listen to it, and we have people that are in the pews as well. So what do you want to church members, as we've talked about, like the pastor fatigue and things that are going on, what do you want church members to know in order to support their pastor in this culture? I'm going to use cultural moment. I'm putting like air quotes here, but because I think sometimes in the pew, we rely so much on the pastor just to guide us, but kind of going, hey, we're all in this together. It's the priesthood of all believers here. But how does a church member, I said this to Brian at lunch, like, yes, we're called to go out and change the world, but we have to be active in our church as well. Right. And that means ministering to our ministers as well. So how do church members respond in this moment?
A couple things. I think one, man, be faithful, be involved, understand when you're not present, it matters. Right. Sometimes the larger the church, you start thinking, does it really matter if I'm there? Be involved, be plugged in, serve. When there's a need, make sure that you're there saying, how can I serve? Here's the second thing. Encouraging words, encouraging emails, encouraging texts, I guarantee you make a difference for your pastor.
Absolutely.
We are a bad news culture.
Yep.
So I may listen to the Bible Bistro podcast 15 times and love everything that I hear and never say that to you.
Right.
But you say something I disagree with, I may shoot something off to you and say, well, I don't think that's what John, 13 meant or whatever it may be. Give your pastor, give your preacher, give your minister encouragement. It is invaluable. I can't tell you the difference that it makes. I was speaking with a law enforcement leader not long ago, and I shared with him, I think the overwhelming number of people support law enforcement. I really believe that, but they just never say that. They never tell people in law enforcement. And it's the people that are upset or the people that are angry that you hear from. And I just think that's a huge, huge principle that I would say to church members is encourage your minister, encourage your pastor, because a lot of them could be doing a lot of different things. Yeah. And you will miss them incredibly, would be my guess, if they're gone.
That you're exactly right. And I guarantee you, I don't care what church you're in, I guarantee your pastor has heard negative messages this last year, that they've gotten phone calls, they've gotten face-to-face angry comments, they've gotten emails. And so you're right. And, we kind of always have to remind ourselves that there are a lot of people out there who maybe aren't saying things who are not upset with us, but sometimes it feels like everybody's upset because that's the only thing we're hearing. Yeah, that's well said.
And let me ask you this. What would you say to church members, how they navigate these issues on their own? Because I think sometimes how would you help them get their mind? Because I think we all come from different standpoints. And, if you live in an urban area or a rural area or anything like that, or where you grew up, what would you say to them, how they should be processing the world around them? I know pastors have a voice in that, but how can they be processing themselves to become to these issues biblically, or with the mind of Christ?
Well, I think for many people, to your point, Brian, you said 15 minutes a day in the Bible. I think for a lot of people, sadly, even though they may be faithful to their church, the only Bible reading they do is on Sunday morning during the sermon, or during their ABF or their small group that they're a part of. So I think having a plan to be in the Word, but also having community with other people. One of the things I loved about our time together, Brian is so much smarter than I am when it comes to the Bible.
You and me both.
And I mean, when this whole progressive Christianity series that we were looking at, I was bouncing all kinds of terms off you because I didn't know how to define deconstruction. Now, that's crazy. I should have, but having someone that you can lean on, and I think in the local church level in the pew, having people that may be a little bit older, maybe they're a little further along spiritually, that you can lean on, that you can, ask a question of. I can't think of a single time in my life that church members reached out and said, you mentioned this in your sermon. I'm not sure I understand. Help me better understand it. That never bothers me. I love that. I would love to spend time doing that. But I think sometimes what happens is they don't understand it or it doesn't connect and they just kind of let it go.
Right.
And they don't push further to try to figure out what is the principle here? What is the message here?
This is important. This stuff's important to us. And that's good. Very well said. So, I was we were talking about this just this past week, a minister of a really large church, LifeChurch.tv, Craig Groeschel. I mean, a lot of people will know that name and preacher. And he preached on giving up.
Yeah.
And, I said, I'm concerned that we're in this. We see some, Barna, we see some smart people who are saying this is something we need to be concerned about. And he was very transparent to say, even though he's in this great situation, a lot of ministers, a lot of guys would look at that and go, holy cow, he's really made it. He's in this really good situation. But here's my question for you then, Greg. What would you say to pastors?
Yeah.
Whether they're in a larger congregation or smaller congregation, what would you say to encourage them in this period of time?
I got 3 things. Number 1, you are needed more than ever.
Right.
There are the Bible colleges, many of them may not be producing as many vocational ministry majors as they did at one time. And I think every single person that's listened to this podcast, they absolutely are needed if they're in ministry.
Right.
Number 2, don't go it alone. Don't be the Lone Ranger.
Right.
I'm so thankful for friendships that I have and that I can lean on. We were talking at lunch about the Danville area. There was not a lot happening within our tribe of churches with ministers getting together and connecting. We've been able to do some pretty cool things, sharing lunch and, dreaming of ideas that I think sometimes we're too locked into, if I'm friends with this person and I get to know this person, what happens if one of their church members comes my way or one of my church members goes their way? I think you just have to have a higher view. And then the third thing I'd say is look for opportunities where your soul can be nourished. I found the Spiritual Formation Retreat with Dr. Jody Owens from Johnson. I was in a dark place personally in 2017, and I want to qualify that. There was no secret sin. There was no seriously, there really wasn't.
I get what you're saying.
But I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to go to church.
Right. Just kind of burned out.
Yes, absolutely. And I went to that retreat and I realized I was working really hard, but my soul was just thirsty. And I think there's opportunities that you don't have to drive to Tennessee to find.
Right. That's good. Good words there. I appreciate that. Very, very well thought through.
Yeah. And so what would you say to other pastors out there? How do you remain resilient in this time? You talked about you're in a dark place. My ministry experience wasn't always super great, and I found myself in a very dark place at one point. How do other pastors that are maybe feeling this weight, how do they remain vigilant and resilient during this time?
Well, and again, don't do it alone. Don't go it alone. And I think sometimes, I don't know your situation, but I think sometimes pastors, ministers have been burned by being too vulnerable or developing friendships, and then the friend betrayed them in the local church. Find someone that you can connect with, that you can confide with, that you can drink coffee with. If you're a golfer, you can play golf with, and don't go it alone. I think that's the number one mistake many vocational ministers make is they try to go it alone. They try to do it alone. And I can't do that. I need to have a community. It's kind of a cheesy word, but I need to have a tribe of people that I can lean on. And I've been blessed, and Brian, you're one of those guys that,
appreciate that.
I am thankful for the friendship that we've had and the times that we've been able to be together. And if you don't know how to do that, ask. If you don't know how to do that, one of the things that's happening in Danville right now is on the race issue. There's been multiple conversations with several white pastors and several African-American pastors. And one of the lead voices in the African-American church in Danville has said, the number one thing you can do to make a difference as a pastor is build a friendship with a black pastor, build a friendship with a Hispanic pastor, and go eat at Red Lobster and sit in the middle of the restaurant so everybody can see you. That's a great optic.
Model it. Yeah. I mean, modeling
and yet, that's uncomfortable for some. It's outside your comfort zone for some. It's okay to be uncomfortable.
Well, that's what you said earlier. Grace is sometimes messy. I mean, sometimes it's hard. It's doing the hard thing even when we know it's the right thing. So,
and the other thing, Ryan, back to your question, counseling is one of those things that most pastors have no trouble prescribing to the church member, but would never think about doing themselves.
That's well said.
The longer I'll be 52 this summer. I'm not sure that counseling isn't a good answer for just about anybody, quite honestly.
I agree.
We think I can't go to counseling unless I have a crisis.
No,
And I think sometimes, I think of our friend Phil Foster and the great work that he does in Bloomington Normal. And he's one of probably a dozen that are available.
Yeah.
If that's where you're at, I think that'd be a great resource.
Be great for churches to help with that too, encourage their pastors to participate in that. So that's great. I really appreciate that. Well, I was talking to somebody about this kind of idea that I have that people are kind of burned out. We've used this word fatigue, and they actually told a story that after Katrina, if you remember that,
I do.
The Hurricane Katrina and all of that rebuilding, that there were several church leaders in that area, Mississippi, in that general area, Louisiana, who after they got through kind of the hardest part of that and we're into the rebuilding part, things, in other words, it wasn't in the middle of the crisis, but kind of they gotten through that crisis. A lot of them left that area. This person used the term compassion fatigue. You're called to be compassionate in this area and so much, and you can only take so much, and you kind of go, I can't do this. So they move to these other areas. Now, here's my concern, and this is where we're coming to. Where do you move to avoid the kind of situations that we've been talking about today? Anywhere you go, you're going to be dealing with this.
I mean, Israel's handling the virus pretty well.
Oh my God!
I mean, you're not. That's the point.
And they may have some other things that are going on in Israel.
Maybe one or two other things. Yeah. No, my point is, it's not just Louisiana. I mean, it's nationwide.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I don't think the issue, I would call it a hate issue, maybe more than a racism issue. But I mean, you just see so much hate right now, and so many. I don't think it's going away.
Right.
I don't think one day we're going to wake up and say no more hate in America. COVID, I don't know that it's going away. I mean, there's been some good signs that have happened, but I think I think churches and pastors are going to be dealing with the issues related to it for quite some time.
Right.
I think, when it comes to politics, I think this is the new norm in a lot of ways.
Right.
I really do. And I don't know how you get away. The only thing you can do is rise above it.
Right.
I can't remember which preacher said it. It might have been T.D. Jakes, but the statement was, Jesus didn't come to take sides. He came to take over. And I think that's something we have to remember in everything that we do. Politics is not our answer. COVID policy is not our answer. Doctor whoever is not our answer. Jesus is our answer. And you can't drive that home enough.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't trust in ourselves even. This is what got us in this trouble in the first place. We put our trust in Jesus. We trust in him. So.
And yet it's that balance of, I think it was Karl Barth that said years ago, I wake up every day and I got my Bible in one hand, the newspaper. So you can't just, do the bury your head in the sand.
No,
and you've got to have cultural connectivity, but it's got to happen with a Christian worldview, with a biblical worldview.
I appreciate that, Greg. And I really appreciate everything you've said here and the things you're doing here in order to kind of navigate this. And like you said, you're not burying your head in the sand. You're engaging it. And you're dealing with it. So I appreciate that.
But I appreciate you guys. I feel like I'm not worthy of this podcast.
Oh my gosh,
Mark Zeese and Ryan Burge and all of these guys. But I do think you're hitting something that's close to my heart, and that is the trends are not overly optimistic when it comes to people in ministry and longevity in ministry. So I appreciate you guys raising this.
And I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's worth repeating again. We want to be positive. There are many people out there, many podcasts, and they're being just negative and not offering answers. We want to be positive. We love local congregations.
Absolutely.
We believe the local church is important.
Yeah.
We believe it makes a difference in their communities, and we love pastors. We think church leaders need to be held up and they need to be encouraged. And so
the local church minister, pastor, whatever title you has such a huge swath of influence, even if they don't realize it. I want to tell you one quick story. Bob Russell, probably one of the great preachers in the history of the Stone Campbell movement. came to our church in Clinton years ago. I was just so honored to have him there. He's been someone that I've looked up to for years and years. And he got done with first service, and my friend Audrey was 87 at the time, came up to me. We were getting ready for Bible school, and she said, I went up to that Bob Russell and said, you're a pretty good guy, but you're no Greg Taylor. I said, Audrey, no. So I went up to him and I just thought, I'm going to get rebuked. And I said, Bob, I am so sorry. He said, oh, don't be sorry. He said, she really loves you. Yeah. And he said, my guess is there's a lot of people that really love you here. And he said, I hear that all the time. I'll go to churches and they will tell me how much they love their pastor. Right. But how many times does that same person tell their pastor?
Right. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of going back to this, we need to be praying for our pastors.
Right.
Yeah.
Like praying, but also, it's kind of when we share the gospel, we can't just pray for someone. We need to share the gospel with them. And in the same way with the pastor, like we need to pray for them and also encourage them in our spoken word. And, not just like reviews online, only speak up when it's negative, but like give the 5-star reviews as well.
Right. Absolutely.
And I tell you, Bob Russell's a perfect example of someone who's very encouraging of other ministers. He never saw it as competition or, it was.
We had a study group, right? Where he brought guys in.
He does that. And even today, he's retired from the local church, but then he continues to have these retreats for ministers and brings them in and encourages them and kind of gives them a good meal and just makes them feel special. And he still does that. I'll tell you this, since you told that story, I'll tell you the story real quick. I was serving in the Dominican Republic, and he came to visit our church, and he came to my Sunday school class. I had a Sunday school class that I taught for English-speaking staff, missionary staff of our organization, but then there were other organizations in town that would come, and we'd have a Sunday school class. And he came and he sat down, and as he was going, he says, "You're just a really good teacher, aren't you?" I thought, oh my goodness.
I know.
Take me now, Lord.
But think about how much
the
that
Protestant
impact,
Pope has blessed you.
In a lot of ways.
Yes.
You're not
wrong, The Restoration Movement
Ryan.
Pope has blessed you.
Right.
But think how different that was if he would have said, Brian, that was a pretty good job, but you really got
let me correct
that
these.
exposition on John 7:31 wrong. And, in my many years of experience, here's what you should have said.
Right.
It's the difference between an encouraging word and almost encouraging word.
Well said. Yeah, that's very good. So anything else, Ryan?
I don't think so. I mean, we've covered a lot of topics here, and I think, again, it's just coming back to this, that I don't, the numbers are not good.
Right.
But, with the power of Christ, I don't think the message of Christ is diminishing in power. And so how we can all be active participants and ministering to those who are ministering to us.
Yeah.
And that's an important role for us as congregants. And, as the world becomes more divided and, we watch more media and it just pushes us, a world that desperately wants to pull us apart, that the hope of Christ can bring us together.
Well, and my guess is whatever metrics you're looking at, there probably are some bad news, but there's also probably good news if you search for it. Online possibilities. I mean, man, I would love to have not had a COVID. But there have been some blessings that have come out of it.
Yeah, it's amazing how many churches learn to live stream, and there's people watching who haven't been in the services.
First Sunday of 2020, I shared a vision sermon and said, "This is the year we're going to step it up online." And our tech guys who you met today said, "We're a year away from that happening." And they made it happen in 48 hours.
Right.
Because they had to.
Right.
But that's a positive.
Yeah.
Now, again, there's a lot of negative.
Right.
But look for the positive.
Sure.
Be that cup half full church leader.
Right. Well, Greg, thanks so much for coming to the Bistro.
I'm honored.
Yeah, it was fun.
Good
Enjoy
stuff.
it. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. Next week, Brian and I are talking about the Gospel of John again and talking about some of the symbolism that is found in it. Light and dark, bread, living water, all the good stuff. That discussion goes along with the book we will also be discussing next week, aptly called Symbolism in the Fourth Gospel by Craig Kester. The week after, we will be looking at how all the gospel accounts work together, and then onto an episode with a special guest about the Gospel of Luke. We've got some good ones coming up you won't want to miss. You can find show notes, links, and more at thebiblebistro.com, as well as sign up for our email newsletter to stay in touch, but also to get some exclusive content we are working on. You can find us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Bible Bistro, and as always, you can subscribe to us on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. Thanks so much for listening. We will talk to you next Tuesday.